Welcome back to another episode of Astrology with Alice. I'm your host, Alice Bell, and today we have a fun Q&A episode. So I just want to thank everyone who wrote in questions. They were very thoughtful, and I had a lot of fun looking through them, and I can't wait to answer them. So in this episode, we're going to cover a range of topics. So everything from synastry alignments to nodal placements, also just birth chart basics, returning to that, and then looking a bit into timing and transits. So honestly, let's just get right into it because we've got a lot to cover today. Okay, so the first question we have is a synastry related question. Someone says, what are the best houses to have in synastry? Like a lot of your partner's planets or angles falling in your 4th, 1st, or 7th house. So I love this question because I honestly feel like there's so much emphasis on are sun signs compatible or moon signs compatible or Venus signs compatible, and not enough attention is paid to the houses. And it's really important when you are aligning your chart with someone else's and overlaying the two, looking at where do your birth chart planets fall in their chart and vice versa. Like what houses are your planets activating for them and what houses in your chart are they activating for you. And with long-term romantic relationships specifically, a lot of the time I will see the angular houses highlighted. So for instance, like your 1st house, your 7th house, because your ascendant and descendant angles live in those 2 houses, or the houses that contain your midheaven or IC angles become super important with long-term relationships, mainly because a lot of the time it's about like living together and creating a family and that person becoming a new family member to you because that relationship is so long and ongoing throughout your life. So when using whole sign houses, if you happen to have your midheaven or IC angles in a house that's not the 10th or 4th, then you'll want to prioritize the houses that contain the midheaven and the IC a bit more. I just noticed angular synastry is so powerful in these longer relationships, but also just looking at other relationships in general. And like, for instance, having, like, if you looked at your chart overlaid with a coworker's, a lot of the times where your planets fall in someone's chart or vice versa really show the quality of that relationship or how you may have met that person or what the common like shared interests or shared goals of the partnership are. So with a colleague type relationship, a lot of the times maybe their planets activate your 10th, your 6th, or your 2nd house. Whereas with romantic relationships, like I just said, like the midheaven and the IC become so important too, because it's about having these long-term shared goals as a couple and maybe starting a home family life together. I would also add in the 5th house with romantic relationships. I see this a lot of the times where someone in the couple's rising sign is the same sign that rules the other partner's 5th house or vice versa, or there's a lot of planets from one person that fall in the other person's 5th house, just because the 5th house is the house most linked to romance and having a good time and sexual attraction. So those will show up very strongly in romantic relationships specifically. And I guess on a similar note, 8th house shared synastry might be equally as important because having a long-term romantic relationship, naturally the topics of shared money, shared resources are going to come up. So there might be alignments between someone's planets activating your 8th house, or that honestly, 8th house, I see that a lot show up with the people I work with and who I employ in my own business, because again, it goes back to this topic of shared money, and how that's a big quality of the relationship that you have with that other person with 8th house alignments. So I guess that's a long-winded answer to this question, but yes, angular houses, 1st, 7th, 10th, or 4th, or the houses that contain the midheaven IC are super important. And then also for romantic relations specifically, I would add in the 5th and the 8th. Okay, second synastry question. My question is about the positive and negatives about a conjunct moon in synastry. So this would be if someone has the same moon sign as you, and more specifically, if it's even the same degree of that same sign. People usually view it as a positive thing, but there's someone I don't get along with too well who has a conjunct moon to me. I honestly agree with this person. I do have a lot of female friends, and my sister too have Pisces moons just like me, but I find that the most fighting in relationships comes through with these people that have the same moon sign as well. Like there's like kind of this tension that always comes up, or we're almost too similar. Like I just noticed that if you have a very similar style of expressing your emotions, sometimes that's not always the easiest thing because there's no one there to call you out and be like, why don't you try expressing your feelings in a different, more healthy way? It's almost like you're too similar in that way, which could lead to that fighting or not getting along too well. It's a great synastry alignment to have, but yes, it can be tricky because it's just too similar in that way. And sometimes in couples and close relationships, you need almost the opposite energy to help balance out your own qualities. One thing I would add on to that is that if you're finding it hard to get along with people who have the same exact moon sign as you, honestly, people that have the same element of moon sign might be a bit easier. Like, although I get into the most like bickering type situations with people who have my same exact Pisces moon, I really get along with Scorpio moon because that's another water sign and they get me in a way, but they're a little bit different. So moon of the same element, I see a lot with synastry, and that might be easier. Okay, now let's move on to some questions about the natal chart. So this person asks, as a professional astrologer, when you're looking at someone's chart, is there one thing or biggest thing you see that other people in general would completely misunderstand or misinterpret about their chart? So this question really got me thinking about how I approach looking at charts and how that's very different now 8 years into studying astrology than it was at the very start of my astrological journey. So I would say like a big thing when people are first getting started in learning astrology is that there's too much fixation on the negative chart placements and believing that those are like a hindrance to your success and almost using that as an excuse for your behavior. Like, oh, I have Saturn in the 7th house. Dating is never going to work for me. I'm never going to end up in a relationship. I'm destined to be alone. Whereas I would say every difficult chart placement, and honestly, the most difficult chart placements are your greatest gifts in this life, where those challenges have happened to you for a reason, and they're there to offer you wisdom and the chance to overcome those challenges and grow as a person in that part of your life. So going back to that same example of Saturn in the 7th, maybe reframing your mindset towards a challenging placement like that and being like, okay, well, there are challenges when it comes to dating and being more of myself in relationships, but it's also a big opportunity to learn how to more fully open up to people and not fear rejection so much in relationships and kind of get over that huge anxiety and fear you might have. Or like, let's say you have Saturn in the 10th house, maybe all of those same traits get applied to career, and it's a lot about overcoming public criticism or fear of putting yourself out there at work. And then also returning to this question and giving another answer here about, is there one thing that most people either misunderstand or misinterpret? I would say I notice a lot of the time people get too caught up in smaller details of the chart while ignoring like what is the most immediately obvious. And I find just looking at the 10 planets in your chart, and as well as just looking at the most basic timing technique transits, like that will tell you the most important things you need to know about your chart, rather than getting caught up on what is this kite aspect pattern? What does this YOD mean? What is this very obscure thing related to timing in some event that I'm trying to predict in my life? I think everything that needs to be understood at a core level comes through the basics of the chart. And also going back to the concept of aspects, like square, opposition, and conjunction are what I prioritize. And the 10 planets, more specifically the 7 traditional planets, I make more important than Uranus, Neptune, Pluto. I just think when it comes to astrology, simple is more effective. The third question I have about natal chart questions is how to interpret Mars in the 12th house. So this person originally had it as a longer question, but I wanted to open it up to just looking at Mars in the 12th house in general, because I have this placement, and I've also noticed I've been encountering a lot of people with Mars in the 12th house recently, like in the past 6 months. And we've been trading notes and like realizing how similar we actually are. And I also think it's a common chart signature among people that are interested in astrology, because you have this planet like Mars, which is a lot about what motivates you, where you're finding meaning, what you want to put energy towards. And having it in a house like the 12th means you want to put energy towards something that is more spiritual, and astrology falls into that category. So it's a natural chart signature across astrologers. What I personally notice with Mars in the 12th house in my own chart is this constant lifelong struggle of learning how to speak up and be more direct and let people know when I'm upset with them, rather than being indirect and passive aggressive or bottling up anger and frustration. I find that I have very strong reactions to things, but no one would know that. And because I keep it hidden, or I only let like other people know. It's very hard for me to just speak up to the person that I'm upset with. So that's something I'm always trying to work on with Mars in the 12th. I don't think it helps that it's in a sign it doesn't work well in, Cancer. It just leads to the getting very emotionally worked up in that way. And also, like I just said, wanting to put energy towards spiritual pursuits. I would also add in getting a lot of benefit out of healing practices like therapy, or doing your own thing like journaling or meditation, and really learning how to trust your own intuition and take action based on your gut instinct rather than looking outside of yourself for answers. I would say it's a placement that's a lot about building this greater self-trust. And one final interpretation I have of Mars in the 12th that relates to health is, yes, there might be this struggle with mental health throughout your life, but also like Mars is associated with the head. And Mars in the 12th house, I note a lot of my health problems come through headaches. I have constant tension headaches, chronic tension headaches that I've had throughout my whole life. So I'm just bringing that up in case like anyone else feels the same, because I've always wondered why I have these like headaches every single day. And I really think it's due to the Mars in the 12th house. So if anyone else has that placement and they also struggle with headaches as a huge health theme, let me know, because it will honestly help me to feel less alone. Okay, now let's move on to some questions about transits. So one person says, I've been enjoying learning about different timing techniques via your newsletter and video content. I wondered if you could walk us through which ones you would use when, or if there's an order of priority or some things that would be influencing more strongly than others at a given time, like how planet aspects are sort of priority for the vibe of a day before signs that the moon's transiting. Okay, so I am planning to do a longer Substack article on this, because you can get really in depth with like why I prioritize certain timing techniques over others. But just looking at how I mainly use transits, solar returns, lunar returns, and annual perfections, I would say those are my top 4 timing techniques. I would always prioritize transits out of all of those. Like if it has to be showing up in a transit chart for it to be happening in general. So my hierarchy of timing techniques would be always start with transits, and I'll get into more specifics of transits in a second, but start with transits, then add in a solar return chart to see how are you feeling about certain transits? How is it impacting you on a more individual level? Then I would also add in annual perfections, because in addition, like hand in hand with a solar return chart, annual perfection year and the ruling planet of that annual perfection year will show you in addition, like other year-long themes you need to be focusing on. And then to get even more micro, I would look at lunar returns just to see like, okay, what's the next 2 weeks of my life look like? And then what are the next 2 weeks after that? Just more of a monthly or 2 week by 2 week type of vibe. So that's the hierarchy of timing techniques in general. But then looking at what I would prioritize within transits, always start with Jupiter, Saturn, and the north and south nodes. That will tell you everything you need to know about a specific year, like where the most growth and change or opportunities or restructuring is coming through. So always look at like where Jupiter, Saturn, and the north and south nodes, what houses are they transiting? Are they aspecting any natal planets, natal angles? From there, you can go more micro and look at like month to month themes with the transits of Sun and Mars. I would put those first, but then you can also add in Mercury and Venus. And then on a day-to-day basis, looking at the transit of the moon. And then with the longer transits of Pluto, Uranus, Neptune, I really only emphasize those when they're making an exact degree aspect to a natal planet or a natal angle. So like, for instance, with Pluto in Aquarius for 20 years at the moment, if you have Aquarius planets, I really would not prioritize Pluto aspecting those planets until it gets like within a degree of those planets. Just because Pluto and Uranus and Neptune, they all move so slowly that they'll spend about 1 to 3 years moving back and forth across a natal angle or natal planet in your chart. And then I feel like I had one more thing I wanted to say. This gets complex and why I want to do a whole newsletter on this topic, but you also, when it comes to more exact timing and like order of priority, the shorter transits become a lot more important when they meet up with longer transits. So I would put more emphasis on a transit like the Sun or Mars if they happen to be meeting up with Saturn or Uranus or they're squaring Pluto. Like that's when those become a lot more important than they normally would be because they're felt more intensely and they get incorporated into these bigger life themes that you're experiencing. But yeah, stay tuned for more information on that topic because you can go a lot deeper with that. Next question about transits. Saturn is moving into the 6th house of my chart, and I recently heard that's a house of bad fortune. I'm recently divorced and moving to a new state, and this idea of a bad house has me feeling afraid. Do you believe in good and bad houses? That is good and bad houses is a very traditional astrology terminology. I consider that to be too black and white. The reason like a house like the 6th house gets a reputation of being a bad house is because I touched upon this a bit in the houses episode, so you may want to go back to and listen to that too. But the 6th, 12th, 2nd, and 8th houses are more challenging because they're hidden from the ascendant and the descendant. So it's just harder to get a grasp on those areas of your life and really incorporate them into your identity and your personal growth. And it takes longer, or there's certain like sides of yourself that it's hard to place a finger on and fully understand. So like the 12th house, having planets there, for instance, it can be hard to understand what that planet's about or fully incorporate it into your life because it's literally hidden from you. And same with the 6th. And I also think with topics specifically related to the 6th, they have a lot to do with the more boring aspects of life. So like daily health, daily routine, the work that you do for other people, getting organized. It's not exactly the most exciting parts of life. That being said, I don't find transits to these houses to be super bad or negative, but rather they offer opportunities to really get like more in line with your life. Like for instance, the 6th offers you that opportunity to get better organized and find better balance between work and your health and your personal life so that you aren't stressing yourself out or going too far in one direction or the other. And personally, like I found Saturn through the 6th house to be very empowering. Like that's when I left behind a career that wasn't fulfilling. I worked in fashion and I became a full-time astrologer. So I spent that whole Saturn in the 6th house transit pivoting my career to to be something that was of service to people or helped people in a bigger way than I thought my career in fashion did at that time. So I wouldn't be afraid of this transit. I just think it will have you really figuring out what work is absolutely necessary, what you need to prioritize every day, and how you can stay on top of everything. Rather than looking at a house or good or bad, I look at what transits might be trickier by seeing if there's natal planets that are going to be hit upon by a certain transit. So for instance, I found that Saturn moving over my moon in the 8th house was a way harder transit than Saturn through the 6th house ever was, because like it's Saturn to the moon, and it's affecting like such a gentle, innermost planet by something very harsh and isolating like Saturn. So I would look at like transits like those to be a lot more challenging. And you saying that you just went through a divorce, I bet you're coming out of very difficult transits, maybe with Saturn through Pisces in your 5th house. I don't know if you have mutable sign placements in your chart, but I would imagine Saturn going through the 6th is maybe now a time of getting back to you and what do you want to be doing in your everyday life and your work and your career and your health. Reframe it to look like that. Okay, and then the third question we have about transits is how to know if you're going to be impacted by certain transits or not. I never know when I'll be affected by a new or full moon. So I want to focus on the second part of that question the most, because again, this is another question I could do a whole newsletter workshop on, and I do plan to do that soon. But just looking at if a new or full moon is going to impact you is based on whether that new or full moon, you need to always check what degree a lunation is taking place at. And if you have natal placements that are conjunct that exact degree, square, or opposite to that exact degree. And you can automatically know that that new or full moon is going to be a bigger deal for you. And if you have a specific year where there are a lot of significant lunations like that happening to your chart. Like let's say you have a new moon in 2026 that falls at the exact same degree of your rising sign, like the exact same degree of your ascendant. You can know that maybe 2026 rather than 2025 or 2027, like that year is going to be a bigger year in terms of first house themes, like having this brand new life chapter unfold or getting more attention for something that you're launching or some new opportunity coming your way. So the whole year becomes almost tainted is a negative word, but it becomes influenced by how that new or full moon is impacting your chart to that exact degree. And just to give another example, like I have a 4-degree Taurus midheaven. And so the full moon in Taurus that is coming up in a couple of weeks is happening at, I believe it's at 13 degrees of Taurus. So that's kind of far away from my Taurus midheaven. Like, yes, it's a 10th house full moon, but if this was a year where there was a full moon right at like 3, 4, 5 degrees of Taurus, bigger things might be happening in my career than is what is happening right now, because this full moon in Taurus in 2025 is so far away from the exact degree of my midheaven. So it's not only like important for seeing how that month will go and if it will be an impactful new or full moon that specific month, but actually like how is that whole year unfolding and how is that a bigger year for you if you're getting exact chart placements affected by a new or full moon. Sorry, I cannot talk. I'm talking too fast. Also, one other thing to add on to this is with other transits beside new or full moons, it's really important to look at what degree do they station retrograde and direct at? Because if you have natal placements right on the degree that Jupiter stations retrograde or Jupiter stations direct at, for instance, that Jupiter transit for you, that specific year, will be a way bigger deal for you than it might be for someone else, because when a planet stations retrograde and stations direct after the retrograde is over, it spends a couple weeks like hovering right at that same degree marker. So you're getting like this intense surge of energy related to that planet right affecting that natal chart placement, that natal planet or angle in your chart really sees the effect of that transit. So yeah, to sum up, to know if a transit's going to be a bigger deal for you, you really need to zoom in on exact degrees that a transit is happening, and if you have natal chart placements that line up with those exact degrees. Okay, and then I want to wrap up with a couple questions about the nodes. So 2 people basically asked the same question, so I'm going to combine them. One person says, my husband and I have the same nodal axis, but in reverse. So they have the north node in Pisces and south node in Virgo, and the partner has the opposite, like north node in Virgo, south node in Pisces. And then someone else has the same with their daughter, like the flipped north and south nodes, Pisces and Virgo. They say, does this flipped node placement help to better integrate the 2 nodes or make it more of a struggle? So I want to open this up to talking about just nodal synastry in general. And I do find alignments with the north node tend to feel a little bit more uncomfortable. Like if someone's planets are aligning with your north node, then maybe they're pushing you to grow and develop in ways that don't feel familiar to you, that you know you need to do, but it just feels uncomfortable or kind of scary. Whereas if someone's planets align with your south node, maybe that's more of a comforting relationship that just comes a bit more naturally. So that's one thing to consider. It's very important to look at like, where do someone else's nodes fall in your chart? Like what houses do they activate? And also vice versa. So going back to what we were covering about synastry at the very start and how the themes of the houses that are activated by synastry alignments become super important with what are the main themes and goals you're encountering in that relationship. So you're always going to want to look at, where does someone's north and south nodes fall in your chart, and how are they helping you to better develop the qualities of those houses or those planets that they activate in your chart? So in the case of these 2 questions I got asked, this person's husband and the other person's daughter, with them having the north node activate your south node, maybe they're helping you to better embrace these like natural qualities of the south node that you already have, but maybe you get lazy about developing, or you like forget you have those skills, or maybe they help you to release certain mindsets or patterns that you're holding on to that aren't serving you anymore, because the nodes are so much about this like soul development. And I believe the south node has a lot to do with skills that come easily to you, but that which you may take for granted, while the north node is about like, what are you constantly trying to evolve into and develop to feel more fulfilled? So their role in your life may have a lot to do with that, like releasing what is keeping you stagnant while learning to lean into what may feel uncomfortable, but what you need to embrace. But also it can be a fun exercise in general to look at like, where does a parent's or a friend or a colleague's north and south node fall in your chart? What houses do their nodes activate in your chart? And how are you learning through that relationship to develop the traits of that house further? So to give an example to illustrate this, my dad has his north node falls in my 2nd house and his south node falls in my 8th house. And a huge theme in our relationship is finances. And my dad helps me with my business taxes and helps me to get better organized with the money that I generate through my business. And also helps me with investments, which is very much a 2nd, 8th house theme. And also he introduced me to my first therapist. So he also has that like 8th house mental health related theme that shows up in the relationship too. Whereas my north and south nodes fall in my husband's 1st and 7th houses. And it's very literal in that way. Like we're learning how to be part of a partnership, like a 7th, one of my nodes activates his 7th house. It's a one-on-one committed partnership. But I also find with my north node in his 1st house, I help him tap into traits he may not see about himself and like skills he may not recognize that he's really good at, and that I'm constantly trying to tell him, you need to work on this a bit more. This is what sets you apart. Be more confident in what you have to offer here. So I see my north node bringing out the 1st house of his chart a lot more. Or just like other examples, my sister's north and south nodes fall in my 3rd and 9th house, and we love traveling together. And she's also my literal sibling, which is a 3rd house theme. Or I had a roommate in the past and her north node fell in my 4th house. And a huge part of that relationship was learning how to live together and navigating challenges that came up there. There were quite a lot of those. But yeah, it's interesting how the nodal alignments with other people really bring out like what are the lessons you're meant to learn in the house that their nodes are activating, and then vice versa. So use that as an exercise with a lot of different people you know, and see how it resonates with the quality of the relationship you have with them. Okay, and I think that is all we have time for today. So thank you again for everyone who wrote in. If I didn't get to your question, I have it saved, and I'm either going to elaborate on it in an upcoming newsletter or full podcast episode. And there just wasn't enough time to go fully in depth on that specific question here, but these were amazing and I had so much fun doing these. So I'll have to make them more of a regular thing. But yeah, thank you again for listening and supporting my work. And just a reminder that next Thursday, we have the Scorpio season monthly forecast coming out here on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and then also the written monthly forecast by rising sign will be out on Substack on that same exact day. So I'll see you back here next Thursday. I hope you have a good week.